This is JCT TV. This is Bible study for the 21st century. Always a joy to have you with us, friends, and I want you to know that even during this time of crisis with COVID-19, we're still digging into the Word, and I don't think there's ever been a more important time in my life, and probably yours too, than this in terms of needing the strong meat of the Scriptures. And so we're doing the Gospels, and we're in Mark right now. I've been so for a number of months, probably several weeks yet to come. But I'm looking forward to sharing it with you right after this break.
WOW works with local churches in needy countries. We mobilize those churches, pastors, and volunteers in a concerted effort to care for orphans and widows in their homes and villages. Through that strong faith-based platform, we're able to not only provide food, medicine, and crisis intervention, but we're also able to lead these afflicted ones to faith in God. It's powerful, humbling, and well worth the effort. Please support WOW with your generous gifts and faithful prayer. Thank you.
So friends, we're continuing in Mark, and I just want to let you know that the second tranche, the second half of Mark is now available in Cantelon's Casual Commentary. A lot of you have this, and I know you're enjoying it. I'm able to fill in a lot of the blanks with this that I can't with television because of time constraints. If you've got the four from Matthew and the first one of Mark and now this one, it's starting to add up, right? I'm way ahead of you, by the way. I've finished writing Matthew, Mark, Luke, /Acts, and John, and we're just in the process right now of publishing an entire book, which we'll tell you about once it's ready. But we certainly appreciate the fact that you are following along. And when you have to make sure you ask for this. If you contact us with a donation for JCT or for WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows, if you don't ask for this, we don't send it to you, but we will if you ask for it, free of charge. And it's just, I made it this way because it fits in an envelope. It also fits in your pocket. It can fit in a purse. It's inexpensive to produce, which is always good because with a ministry, you want to count every penny. But it's there for you now. Okay, we're in Mark chapter 8. Last time, we left Jesus just escaping from a whole bunch of opposition by the Pharisees in the area of Dalmanuta, which is probably the city of Magdala. He'd just come across the lake on the boat. He gets back on the boat. He's going to cross the other side again, just getting away. And we pick it up here in verse 14. The disciples had forgotten to take bread. These guys. They did not have more than one loaf with them in the boat. Then he charged them, saying, "Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." And they reasoned among themselves, saying, "It is because we have no bread." But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, "Why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? Do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets full of fragments did you take up?" They said, 12. "And when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of fragments did you take up?" And they said, 7. So he said to them, "How is it that you do not understand?" You know, it's interesting. I just don't sit here and, spout off extemporaneously. Anything I say on television, anything I write represents hours and hours of study. I'm not really good in Greek and Hebrew, but I can get along. And I study the scriptures in the original languages. I do word studies on each critical word. I trace the history in the scriptures. I look at the meaning, both secular and spiritual. In other words, I do my homework, all right? And when I'm doing homework, I'm, reading the commentaries of various theologians and scholars, some who would be termed conservative, others who would be termed liberal. I want to get a balanced perspective. But it's interesting how often I run into some scholar who tries to say that the feeding of the 4,000, which we studied last program, was basically the same story as the feeding of the 5,000, just kind of moved around a bit, but it's basically one event. It's not one event. As we see here, Jesus says, you remember when we fed the 5,000? Yeah. How many did you have left? 12 baskets. I fed the 4,000. How many did you have left? 7 baskets. 2 different occasions in the mouth of Jesus. So let's not try to reduce the scripture to some kind of fantasy, some kind of fiction. This is just the scripture as Mark reported. And as I said to you from the very beginning, Mark basically is writing down what Peter remembered. Mark's words essentially are Peter's recollections. So Mark and Peter are closely allied in this first of the Gospels that was written. Okay. So, the disciples had forgotten to take bread. And they didn't have more than 1 loaf with them in the boat. Jesus sometimes appeared to be a little obtuse in terms of his comments, his statements, his teachings. And here he throws them a bit when he says, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. What? And he's, in the back of the boat, maybe trying to have a little sleep again. And the disciples are arguing and trying to come to some understanding of what Jesus was talking about. What's he talking about? Leaven of the Pharisees, leaven of Herod. What's up with this? So Jesus, aware of it, says to them, why do you reason why are you having this discussion? Because you have no bread. Do you not perceive or understand? Don't you get what I'm getting at when I'm talking about the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod? How dull are you, fellas? What he was talking about here, in terms of the leaven of the Pharisees, he was talking about the spiritual ossification of the Pharisees. Ossification is a big word for decline. They're becoming stone-like. They were dying. They were dead. They were very spiritual, but they weren't alive. They were dead men walking. Jesus is warning them that they not become that way. He understands human nature, and he knows how easy it is from generation to generation for people to lose a little bit of their edge in terms of their idealism or in terms of their religious fervor or in terms of their, in his case, understanding of God's will for mankind. Easy over the generations to get slack, easy over the generations to institutionalize, easy over the generations to basically become lip servers and not loving and serving God from the heart. Beware of that, he says. And also beware of the leaven of the Herodians. What's that? Political expediency is what he's talking about there. There's also a subtle nuance here, where the Pharisees and the Herodians were sort of on the same page. Sort of. In that they were both concerned with power, the power to rule. Now the Romans at that point were dealing from a position of strength because they were the occupying force. They were ruling Palestine. They were in charge of the cities of Israel. They had a very prominent position in Jerusalem. Their headquarters was in Caesarea. There was a proconsul who was in charge, who reported directly back to Rome. There was one emperor, his name was Caesar. I mean, it was all about power for them. And the Herodians, who were basically puppet government under Roman authority, Herodian, referring to Herod and the various offspring, sons and grandsons of Herod the Great, they were the puppet rulers under the Roman umbrella. The Herodians were very concerned about power. The Pharisees were also concerned about power. However, their approach to power was a little bit more circuitous. They still had a hope that there would be a messianic kingdom that would emerge, and that this Messiah, who of course would be Jewish, would rule the world from Jerusalem, and he would subdue the Roman Empire. He would subdue all the remnants of the Greek, Alexander the Great Empire that had preceded the Romans. Yeah, he would pursue, the subdue the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians, and the Europeans, and he would rule the then known world out of Jerusalem. So in that sense, the leaven, if you will, of both Pharisees and Herodians was related to temporal power. So he's warning his disciples not to fall into spiritual decline and not to be seduced by political power. That's really what he was getting at here. Now you can say, well, little wonder the disciples didn't get it. Eventually they got it. Jesus was always way ahead of them, okay? And a lot of what they began to realize after the resurrection and the ascension had been sown, if you will, by Jesus' words and comments and teachings in that 3-year period when they were itinerating with him. A lot of the stuff that they had heard from him, they'd never understood. It was kind of percolating in their spirits, in their minds, but they didn't get it. Even after the resurrection, when he called them up to the Galilee before the ascension, some of them came up to meet with him, and the Bible says several were still doubting. I mean, they'd seen him, in the upper room afterwards, or wherever it was they were staying after the resurrection, but they couldn't get their minds around it. We're human, right? It takes a lot to convince us sometimes. Anyhow, the Pharisees, the Herodians, both real adversaries of Jesus. The Pharisees, because Jesus was presenting a whole new approach to heaven. The Herodians, because Jesus still might represent a political challenge. He could be an insurrectionist, and eventually, of course, he was crucified by the Romans as an insurrectionist. Take heed, Jesus says. Beware, beware, all right? So let's move on from that to verse 22. Then he came to Bethsaida. Now, Bethsaida is not exactly on the other side of the lake from Magdala, although when you're in Magdala, just north of Tiberias, Bethsaida is northeast, up at the northern end of the lake. It's almost at the Golan Heights. It's sort of on the foothills of the Golan Heights. It's built out of basalt rock, which means black volcanic stone, and it's a remarkable ruins. I've been there many times, especially in the heat with those black rocks. It's like going into a sauna. But Bethsaida was also a fishing town. Bethsaida was a fishing town. You had Capernaum, a fishing town, Magdala, a fishing town. So Jesus is kind of going, on a diagonal across to Bethsaida. And there at Bethsaida, he's going to have a very interesting encounter with a blind man. And I don't want to start that now because we're almost ready for a break. But after the break, we'll continue with this study. Jesus was remarkably flexible. You'll see what I mean in a moment.
The Bible tells us that true religion is visiting orphans and widows in their distress. The Bible also says that God is a father to the fatherless and a defender of widows. Heaven's core values for mankind begin with God's heart for the least of these. When you support WOW, you're in the sweet spot of God's heart for the poor. Yes, we're only a small player in this great drama, but at least we're on the field. Please give generously.
So we left Jesus on the boat going on a diagonal from Magdala up to Bethsaida on the northeast coast of the Sea of Galilee. Bethsaida is very interesting. When you go there now, You say, how was this ever a fishing village? Because the water is not close. The water has got to be a quarter mile away. Well, the water has receded a lot over the years, but also the Jordan River used to be very big at that time, and it came right past Bethsaida as it flowed into the lake. And it's very likely that there was a kind of a port there, or at least a major docking area for fishing boats right there in the river. And they get in the river and they just go down to the lake and fish and come back. I think that may have been the case. Don't count on it because I'm not an archaeologist, but as I've been there many times, that's what I have assumed could have been the situation. Nevertheless, it was a fishing village. Peter came from there, Philip came from there, and so did Philip, Peter, and Andrew. All came from Bethsaida. They get there, and look what happens. He came to Bethsaida, this is verse 22 of Mark 8, and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. This is interesting. When he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. He looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. Then he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up, and he was restored and saw everyone clearly. Then he sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town nor tell anyone in the town. Jesus was dealing with health issues all of the time. A lot of malaria, a lot of just general human afflictions, but he also dealt with, as the scripture says, the halt, the lame, and the blind. The blindness was very common. And there's any number of accounts of Jesus healing people in the Gospels. Most of Jesus' healings were done in public. Huge crowds, people pressing in. He wouldn't have to spend a lot, if any time hardly, other than just interacting for a few moments with those whom he was healing. But in this case, he takes him out of town for a private encounter. He leads him like he would lead a child. Of course, a blind man would need to be led that way. And he lays his hands on the man twice after spitting on his eyes. There's no touching the hem of his garment here. This is hands-on healing by increments. And there's no explanation. Mark doesn't attempt to understand it. Jesus makes no explanation. This is how he does it. So, anything that I might say or anyone else might say, who is a biblical commentator, is conjecture. I mean, I can speculate, you can speculate, but that's all it is. So we just sort of have to, leave it as it is and wonder, why did it happen that way? The first time, he asks the guy how he's doing, and he says, I see men like trees walking. It's like he's got 120 vision. I take my glasses off, and I've got 120 vision, which means my sight is 5 times worse than yours is. And it all began, interestingly, back when I was 9 years of age, and I had what was known as the Asian flu. For 3 weeks, raging fever. Back in those days, my dad was pastoring a small church. We didn't have medical plans. He didn't have money for doctors. And so the way he dealt with me when I was sick was he would anoint me with oil, lay his hands on me, and pray for me. That's what he did. And I remember weeks in a dark room. I couldn't stand any light. And I came out of it, thank God, not dying, but my eyesight was impacted. And so I had to start wearing glasses. 120 vision. Men were like trees walking for me. So Jesus does a little bit more. This time, the guy can see 20/20, as I can see with my glasses. 20/20, absolutely clear. Okay, myopia to clarity, beautiful. Again, why did he do it this way? Your guess is as good as mine. Just don't spiritualize it, okay? Don't try to come up with some sort of mystical or spooky interpretation, because it will only make you look superficial. Just let it be. Okay? Let's carry on. Verse 27. Now Jesus and his disciples went out to the towns of Caesarea Philippi. You know, you get the impression when you're reading Mark especially, because he's basically giving you summaries, that right next door to Bethsaida was Caesarea Philippi. Friends, Caesarea Philippi. You know, when I used to broadcast in southern Lebanon, living in Jerusalem, I would get in my little Volkswagen and drive down through the Judean wilderness, right down way below sea level to Jericho, about 1,500 feet below sea level. Then I would start working my way up the Jordan Valley to Tiberias, and then around the lake, past Magdala, Capernaum, up 8 switchbacks. Believe me, I know there's 8 switchbacks because I have done them so many times I can do them in my sleep. Up with the Mount of Beatitudes, where Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount, right on your right, up to a town called Rosh Pinah in the Upper Galilee, and then a long, long, slow climb up to the Lebanese border. And just before you get to the Lebanese border is what used to be Caesarea Philippi. It's now called Banias. To drive there from Capernaum or Bethsaida, because they were basically just within a few miles of each other on the northern edge of the lake, to get there from Bethsaida is an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours driving. And it's a huge climb. To walk it, I mean, you might be able to do it in a day, but boy, that would be one strenuous walk, all right? So when you read this, you know, now Jesus and his disciples went out to the towns of Caesarea Philippi. You just need to understand it was a huge essay, as we say in Hebrew, essek, a huge effort, all right? And on the road, as they're walking, you know, and you can be sure there was a lot of talking going on, also a lot of silence and enjoying the scenery, because the mountains on both sides as you're going up the Upper Galilee are beautiful. Jesus says, "Who do men say that I am?" And they answered, John the Baptist, your cousin. Some are saying Elijah. Others are saying one of the prophets. He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Jesus answered and said to him, I'm going to underline this, "You are the Christ. You are the Christ." Then he strictly warned them that they should tell no one about him. And he goes on to teach them. I'll get to that in a few minutes. What was happening here was a bit of a retreat for Jesus and the disciples. I mean, they were humans, and there's only so much stress you can take. There's only, you know, so many hours in the day. And when they were constantly being beset upon by crowds with needs and wanting Jesus to get to their need before they got to the other guy's need, it was just a constant pressure. And even though Jesus was the Son of God, he was also Son of Man. He was as human as his disciples, and he was stressed too. I mean, he would get tired too. This is why he would fall asleep in the boat sometimes. They're going across the Sea of Galilee. I mean, this is sometimes why he'd go off at night up into one of the mountains to pray, but also to rest. I mean, this was tough going, all right? So this is a bit of a retreat, and he's taking them up there for a reason, because after he finishes this retreat, he's going to work his way back to Jerusalem, and the events of the Passion are going to occur. So, Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi, as I said, is right there, just south of the Lebanese border. It's really in the foothills of what we call Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon, or Mount Hermon, as it's pronounced by most North Americans, is about 10,000 feet elevation. It gets up to 40 feet of snow in the wintertime. There's a ski outfit there. One of my sons has snowboarded there many times. It's a beautiful resort. But back in Jesus' time, it was just, you know, undeveloped. And in my view, as I study the scriptures, it was the Mount of the Transfiguration. It's where Jesus was transfigured, and we'll get to that very quickly. But Caesarea Philippi is situated in a heavily treed area, and there's a lot of water there. Why? Because the water comes from Mount Hermon, 40 feet of snow melts, comes down into the earth, and emerges at Caesarea Philippi. It's not called Banias, but there is this fresh, clear water that just comes out of the ground, and it becomes one of the sources of the Jordan River. And it begins to flow at that point down what was known as the Hula Valley, all the way to the Jordan River and into the Sea of Galilee, and from the Sea of Galilee down the Jordan River right into the Dead Sea. It's a big, big descent. That's why the Jordan River is called the down rusher. That's what it means, because it used to rush down from Caesarea Philippi to the Dead Sea. So I see Jesus there under one of these trees having a good talk. And we'll have to pick up that talk the next time we get into it. I'll be back right after this break.
Why dance when you have very little? When you live from day to day with food insecurity, rampant disease, sickness, and death? You dance because your heart is full of love for God and your hope is strong. WOW has come alongside as the hands and feet of the Lord, providing both home-based care and assurance of God's love. You're happy and you've got to dance. Please support WOW. Let's keep them dancing.
You know, friends, Jim Cantelon Today continues to expand in terms of its release points. We're national on Sunday nights in Canada on the Vision Network. We're national on Sunday nights on the National Religious Broadcasters Network, which is on DirecTV on Sunday nights in the US of A. We're also on a few mini networks in New Mexico and Georgia. And we're also on a major station in El Paso, Texas, and the thing just keeps growing. The reason it's growing is because people want to watch it, and the reason we can be watched is because you support it. And, you know, I'm not a deep-pocketed multimillionaire. I'm like you, I just, do what I can. So I help support it, you help support it. Together, we make it happen. And as we support it, we also support orphans and widows with WOW. Very cool. See you next time.